Sunlight warmed the terraced gardens where the local community gathered for their seasonal rite of renewal. Mara stood at the edge of the cultivated soil, her boots resting lightly on warm stone paths winding toward the dormant canopy environmental system. The air hummed with the low thrum of conversations and the rustle of engineered leaves. She had just updated the Regional Stewardship Council regarding transit network expansion. Her professional yet collegial rapport left her spirits buoyant as she turned back to her task. The atmospheric purifier was the next priority in the archival directive, designed to scrub particulate matter and balance oxygen levels across the plateau. Yet as she approached the designated intake zone, it became clear that the path forward would not be straightforward. Beneath ceremonial stone platforms lay the purifier's intake manifold, deeply buried beneath generations of careful landscaping. The stonework had been laid with precision centuries ago, each slab interlocked to prioritize structural integrity over maintenance access. Mara knelt beside the lowest steps, running her diagnostic scanner along the seams. The device chirped, projecting a holographic cross-section. The schematic revealed heavy mineral accretion on the manifold's exterior, but more importantly, it showed an intricate network of acoustic dampeners in the masonry. These functional elements absorbed excess vibrational energy to prevent resonance fatigue in the ancient foundation. Forcing a standard activation sequence would trigger these dampeners, locking the manifold down for weeks. She needed a different approach, one respecting the way station's original engineering principles while working around the cultural modifications layered on top of it. Pulling her portable harmonic resonator from her tool belt, Mara activated its active modulation mode. The device began outputting simulated community health harmonics, a gentle oscillation designed to mimic the natural frequency of the surrounding ecosystem. She adjusted the gain, watching feedback loops dance across the display. The goal was finding a window where her calibration signal could slip past the dampeners without setting off alarm thresholds. However, as she initiated the initial sweep, the local plaza acoustics threw a curveball. The gathering in the plaza had reached its peak, with hundreds of voices chanting in synchronized rounds, echoing off curved architectural facades. Mara watched her resonator's waveform monitor and frowned. The standing waves generated by the crowd were interacting with the stone surfaces, creating pockets of acoustic cancellation at precisely the frequencies she needed for standard activation. It was a fascinating phenomenon. The cultural rhythm of the plaza was effectively masking the purifier's receptive range. Rather than fighting it, she decided to weave her engineering around the existing sound. She pulled up the way station's original schematics on her wrist display, overlaying them with real-time acoustic mapping data from her resonator. The two grids did not align neatly at first. The dampener network was dense, and the standing waves shifted constantly as people moved through the plaza. Mara took a deep breath, centering herself in the methodical pace that had served her well across so many derelict way stations. She began to map the interference patterns against the structural blueprints, looking for a harmonic window bridging the gap between her equipment and the buried machinery. It required patience. She adjusted the phase of her resonator's output, introducing micro-variations that danced along the edges of the standing wave nodes. The display flickered as she fine-tuned the parameters. The dampeners responded to sustained frequencies, but were less reactive to rapid, nonlinear harmonic shifts, mirroring the organic cadence of the gathering above. Mara watched her wrist screen as the acoustic map began to resolve into a clear pathway. She identified a viable frequency window, a narrow band where standing wave cancellations thinned out just enough for her signal to pass through unimpeded. It aligned perfectly with the gathering's natural rhythm, turning cultural noise into a carrier wave rather than an obstacle. With a quiet exhale of satisfaction, Mara locked the new parameters into the resonator's memory. The acoustic mapping was complete, and the path forward was clear. She prepared to recalibrate her harmonic output, ready to bypass the standing wave cancellation and bring the dormant purifier online. The machinery would wake not through force, but through harmony, just as the original builders had intended for all such interfaces to be engaged. Mara stepped away from the schematic overlay, her focus narrowing as she turned to the physical geometry of the plaza. The standing waves were not static. They breathed with the rhythm of the gathering above, a living interference pattern that shifted with every drum beat and choral resonance. She needed real-time data, not just a snapshot. From her tool harness, she withdrew 3 portable phase sensors, their casings etched with adaptive glyphs matching the purifier's housing. The adaptive glyphs pulsed with a soft amber glow as the sensors interfaced, recognizing the organic composition of the stone and adjusting their grip mechanisms instantly. Mara felt a reassuring vibration through her boots, confirming the devices were drawing negligible power from the residual thermal gradients in the slab, a quiet tribute to the builder's sustainable ethos. Moving with deliberate care, she navigated the stone pathways where local stewards moved in fluid procession, ensuring her presence remained unobtrusive to the cultural flow. She appreciated how the technology respected the sanctity of the space, integrating rather than imposing upon the landscape. She knelt at the northern edge of the plaza, pressing a sensor into the crevice of a foundational slab where the acoustic shadow was deepest. The device locked onto the structural grain, its internal array aligning with the dormant canopy's resonance nodes. She repeated the process along the eastern and western boundaries, creating a triangulation grid that would capture the full spectrum of the plaza's acoustic shifts. Each sensor transmitted raw phase data to her wrist display, where waveforms danced in synchronization with the ceremonial rhythms below. With the perimeter secured, Mara returned to her workbench beneath the waystation interface overhang. She pulled up the archived climate matrices she had decoded earlier, cooperative calibration patterns shimmering in holographic light. The purifier required a specific harmonic signature to engage without triggering structural dampeners, but that signature was currently drowned out by the plaza's celebratory noise. Mara began cross-referencing, layering real-time acoustic feed from the sensors against historical climate data. The holographic display expanded into a complex lattice of intersecting lines, representing decades of atmospheric data compressed into manageable harmonics. Mara watched as the cooperative calibration patterns from the archive began to weave through the chaotic acoustic noise, acting as a filter that highlighted stable nodes within the turmoil. Her fingers moved across the interface, isolating frequency bands where ceremonial output naturally dipped, creating fleeting windows of silence within the collective song. The algorithm ran continuously, searching for a convergence point where the purifier's intake frequency could slip through interference unharmed. She watched data streams merge, revealing a narrow corridor of compatibility opening and closing in time with the gathering's breath cycles. The compatible window emerged not as a single point, but as a rhythmic pulse, synchronized perfectly with the peak emotional resonance of the gathering, proving that the purifier could engage during moments of highest communal energy without disruption. The window was tight, lasting moments at a time, but viable. It demanded precision. Any miscalculation would cause feedback oscillations, destabilizing the environmental grid. She turned to the harmonic resonator, humming in active modulation while managing simulated community health harmonics. The device needed a shift in processing logic. Mara initiated predictive calibration, rerouting power from the stabilized canopy grid to support increased computational load. The resonator's housing expanded slightly as internal coils realigned, the sound evolving from a steady hum into a complex chord that mirrored the plaza's polyrhythms. The resonator's output shifted, tone deepening, as she reconfigured the emitter array to anticipate rather than react. She fed acoustic data into the alignment sequence, instructing the system to track ceremonial rhythm cycles and project harmonic drift forward in time. The predictive overlays manifested as shimmering ribbons of light, projecting forward to show how the standing waves would collapse and reform in seconds to come. The resonator generated overlay simulations, waves mapping where standing waves would form moments before they appeared. Mara guided the overlay simulations to align with these projected vectors, her hands moving in fluid gestures that mimicked the ceremonial dance below, a subtle reflection of the adaptive partnership principles etched into every component she worked with. These predictive overlays allowed Mara to see the future shape of interference, giving lead time to adjust the purifier's engagement frequency with accuracy. The adaptive phase-matching sequence activated, sensors tracking the ceremonial rhythm for frequency alignment. As the final adjustments settled, Mara finished sensor deployment and adjusted her resonator to predictive calibration mode. The lull in the plaza arrived precisely as the phase sensors had predicted, a suspended breath between the drummers and the chanting choruses. Mara stepped forward from the perimeter markers, her boots making no sound on the sun-warmed flagstones. Beneath the ceremonial platforms, the purifier's intake manifold waited, sealed by centuries of harmonic dormancy. She connected her calibrated resonator to the auxiliary coupling, feeling the familiar vibration travel up her forearms as she engaged the ignition sequence. The predictive acoustic overlays in her display shifted from amber to a steady emerald, translating the ambient silence into a precise mathematical window that guided every subsequent calculation. For 3 breaths, nothing happened. Then the manifold groaned, shedding microscopic layers of atmospheric dust as the harmonic frequency finally matched its dormant tolerance. Air began to move. It was not a violent rush, but a deep, rhythmic inhalation that seemed to draw the heavy orbital haze upward through the stone. The purifier's primary coils awakened with a soft chime, perfectly aligned to the cooperative calibration matrix Mara had spent weeks extracting from the climate archives. She watched her readings climb, satisfied as the intake pressure stabilized within optimal parameters. Around her, the cultural gathering resumed its natural cadence, the elders nodding in quiet approval at the subtle shift in the air quality. The way station was waking, and it was doing so exactly as the original architects had intended, gently, collaboratively, and without fanfare. Then the secondary harmonics struck. A low thrum vibrated through the plaza floor, distinct from the purifier's steady pulse. Mara's console flickered, the emerald light stuttering to orange as dormant gravity dampeners, long thought inert, interpreted the purifier's output as a structural stressor. The way station's compensation protocols engaged with outdated logic. Feedback cascaded through the intake manifold, oscillating pressure readings spiking across her display in jagged waves. The resonance matrix flickered violently, forcing her recalibration routines to run ahead of the actual physical feedback. The purifier's coils whined, fighting against an invisible counterforce that threatened to tear the calibration sequence apart. If the cascade continued unchecked, the auxiliary grid would trip its safety breakers, and the entire atmospheric gathering would be plunged into sudden silence. Mara did not panic. She had calibrated for this exact contingency. She detached her primary coupling and dropped to one knee beside the exposed conduit trunk, her hands moving with practiced precision across the manual override levers. The gravity dampeners were pulling mass inward, creating a vacuum shear that the purifier's intake could not overcome on its own. She needed to bypass the standard load distribution and force a parallel surge through the secondary grid lines. Her fingers worked the tactile switches, rerouting power while her eyes tracked the oscillating pressure gauges. Each adjustment sent a shudder through the platform, but she held her ground, listening to the machinery's tone change as she shifted the impedance balance. She monitored the auxiliary grid load with deliberate patience, knowing that rushed adjustments would only compound the harmonic variance. The console warned of thermal buildup, but Mara ignored it, focusing on the harmonic variance instead. She adjusted the phase-matching algorithm in real time, carefully compensating for the dampener's inverted frequency by weaving in a counter-resonance derived from the medical automaton logs she had integrated days prior. The auxiliary grid load climbed dangerously high, but she carefully balanced the surge against the purifier's intake threshold. With a final twist of the primary regulator, she locked the conduits into their new configuration and released her grip. The cascade shuddered once, then dissolved into the background hum of the stabilized grid. The purifier's intake settled into a smooth, continuous draw, the pressure readings returning to a calm baseline. Mara exhaled slowly, wiping dust from her palms as she stood. The way station's gravity dampeners had quieted, their feedback loop successfully broken by the rerouted power. Around her, the plaza continued its celebration, utterly unaware of the delicate engineering that had just kept the air moving. She made a quick note in her logs, marking the auxiliary diversion as a temporary stabilizer rather than a permanent solution. The purifier was breathing steadily now, ready to gather the atmospheric data she needed, but the cascade had proven one thing clearly: the dormant infrastructure still held secrets that would require careful, cooperative navigation. Mara's hands moved across the conduit panel, fingers dancing over the manual rerouting levers to dampen the feedback cascade surging from the dormant gravity wells. The purifier's intake manifold groaned against her calibrated push, a rigid resistance that vibrated through her gloves and up her forearms. Every adjustment she made to force the harmonic alignment only tightened the knot of interference. The standing waves in the plaza were not merely obstacles, they were living currents, shifting with the rhythm of the gathering just beyond the stone interface. She paused, breath hitching as a sharp spike of feedback nearly tripped the auxiliary grid's safety breakers. Forcing the machine to obey was exactly what the architects had warned against in the fragmented logs she decoded. The philosophy of shared recovery wasn't a suggestion, it was the architectural DNA. If the purifier fought her, it wasn't broken. It was refusing to participate in a dynamic that ignored its context. Mara stepped back from the panel, disconnecting her resonator's output coupling. She closed her eyes and let the raw acoustic data wash over her senses. The feedback cascade smoothed into a stream of pure variance. Without her artificial overlays cluttering the readout, the purifier's song became clear. It was humming a complex, polyphonic tone that shifted in real time, tracking frequencies she hadn't programmed. Her eyes snapped open as the diagnostic overlay resolved. The harmonics weren't random noise. They were mirroring the acoustic signatures of the cultural gathering spilling over from the plaza perimeter. The low thrum of the stone drums matched the purifier's intake cycle. The rising choral resonance of the community leaders aligned with the atmospheric pressure equalization. The machine was listening to the people. It was waiting for them. A warm realization settled in Mara's chest, chasing away the tension of the cascade. The way station wasn't a standalone engine demanding isolation. It was an instrument waiting for an ensemble. The purifier couldn't function because she was trying to solo where a choir was required. The architects hadn't built systems to dictate outcomes. They had built them to weave into the fabric of the communities they served, adapting to cooperative calibration rather than overriding it. Mara turned her resonator back to the manifold, but this time she didn't reach for force coefficients. She toggled the interface to cooperative modulation mode. The display shifted from rigid geometric vectors to fluid waveforms that pulsed in sympathy with the ambient soundscape. She began to adjust her output not by calculating the inverse of the standing waves, but by harmonizing with them. As she introduced her signal back into the mix, the purifier's groan softened into a resonant hum. The feedback cascade dissolved, replaced by a gentle oscillation that drew power from the auxiliary grid only where the community's rhythm left gaps. Mara watched the alignment sequence stabilize, the purifier now drinking in the acoustic energy of the plaza to fuel its atmospheric cycles. The crowd's collective tones were doing the heavy lifting, their cultural expression literally breathing life into the dormant infrastructure. Her console chimed with a new notification as the purifier's intake fully engaged. Because the machine was now tracking the gathering's specific acoustic profile rather than her technical commands, it had begun interpreting the harmonic variance as navigational data. Secondary archival packets unpacked within the climate archive, translating the crowd's resonant patterns into star-mapped coordinates. The migratory frequency signature emerged clearly, distinct, and undeniable, pointing toward a coordinate cluster that matched the secondary signal she'd noted weeks ago. Mara leaned in, her hands guiding the resonator to maintain the loose, fluid connection with the plaza's flow. She wasn't closing the loop yet. The data was raw, waiting for deeper investigation, but the path was illuminating. The purifier hummed steadily, its output now a perfect reflection of the cooperative stewardship she saw in the people beyond the stone wall. By surrendering control, she had found the true frequency of the legacy, and the machine sang back in harmony with the world it was meant to heal. Mara let the standing wave cancellation dissolve into the background hum of the plaza, her attention drifting away from the manual conduit rerouting that had consumed her focus moments before as the alignment sequence status finally faded from her consciousness. There was no longer need to push against the acoustic pressure. Instead, she tuned her resonator to ride the crest of the gathering's collective rhythm, allowing the machine's internal logic to weave seamlessly with the human cadence below. The predictive overlays on her wrist display shifted from jagged error bars to smooth, flowing curves as forced calibration gave way to a shared resonance. Below the ceremonial stone platforms, the dormant intake manifold responded not to a command code, but to a shared frequency, its ancient filters waking with a soft, approving thrum that vibrated through the soles of her boots and settled into the dust of centuries. She adjusted the phase sensors, watching as the migratory frequency signature began to stabilize within the purifier's core, no longer fighting the feedback cascade, but guiding it into a manageable resonance. This gentle redirection allowed her to reroute the auxiliary grid load with precision, balancing the power draw until the system breathed in unison with the waystation's dormant infrastructure and the purifier's intake manifold opened wide. As the harmonic array synchronized with the sustained peak of the cultural gathering, the purifier locked onto a stable archival broadcast pattern, its output clarifying as static interference dissolved into pure data. The air around Mara shimmered faintly, charged with the release of trapped potential, while the machine's voice emerged clear and distinct, carrying fragments of history encoded in harmonic layers that resonated with the joy of the crowd above. Data streams cascaded across her interface, no longer fragmented but coherent and rich, demanding her analysis. Mara cross-referenced the emerging migratory chart against the known stellar cartography stored in her neural archive, her movements deliberate as she traced the arcs of ancient travel. The coordinates aligned perfectly with the star maps verified by the medical automaton handshake earlier in the week, confirming a pattern of connection rather than isolation. This was not a random scatter of dormant nodes. It was a deliberate, coordinated restoration network, active and synchronized across light years, its nodes pulsing with life as they reunited through the purifier's broadcast. The builders had designed these systems to adapt and communicate, their intent preserved in the harmonic language that now flowed through the plaza, proving beyond doubt that their legacy was one of unity and shared stewardship. The purification cycles completed with a harmonious chime that resonated with the applause rising from the crowd, a sound of completion that echoed through the restored atrium and signaled the end of a long dormancy. Atmospheric particulates dissolved as the environmental grid engaged fully, stabilizing the air quality for long-term operation and filling the space with a freshness that seemed to rejuvenate every surface. Mara felt the waystation's structural integrity hum back to life, every conduit and sensor aligning with the cooperative calibration matrix she had helped restore, ensuring the infrastructure would endure for generations to come. The purifier was fully operational, its harmonic array locked securely to the gathering's acoustic environment, broadcasting the builder's interstellar migration paths with crystal clarity and unwavering strength. She verified the chart one final time, ensuring the migratory data remained intact and synchronized with the network, her trust in the archival signal absolute as the harmonic layers locked into their permanent configuration. The purified air circulated freely now, a testament to the successful integration of technology and community that had brought this moment about. Mara allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction as the way station breathed around her, no longer a derelict relic, but a living node in a vast, interconnected legacy. The purifier stood ready to serve, its mission fulfilled, and its history preserved for future stewards to understand and honor, the migratory chart verified, and the system confirmed fully operational, the data secure, and the path forward clear. The harmonic hum settled into a steady, breathing rhythm as the atmospheric purifier finally surrendered its resistance and locked onto the gathering's collective pitch. Mara stepped back from the intake manifold, her hands trembling slightly from the sustained tension of the calibration sequence. She had spent years believing that dormant infrastructure demanded precise technical intervention, that every silent machine required a firm hand to wake it. The feedback cascade had been a necessary lesson in humility, stripping away her reliance on forced modulation and leaving only the raw, responsive architecture beneath her fingertips. Now, with the purifier drawing power from the auxiliary grid and stabilizing its intake valves, she opened her portable archive drive and initiated the data extraction protocol. The migratory frequency signature poured into the drive like liquid mercury, resolving into layered topographies of star systems and ecological markers. As the archival stream populated her screen, Mara watched the coordinate clusters align with the cooperative calibration matrix she had verified only hours before. It was a quiet revelation. The builders had not designed these nodes as isolated technical outposts meant to dominate their environment. They had engineered them to listen. Every harmonic variance, every standing wave in the plaza's stone platform had been woven into a broader ecological recovery protocol. Shared stewardship over territorial control. The philosophy that had guided her recent transit network expansions mirrored exactly what she was witnessing now. Infrastructure that adapted to living communities rather than dictating to them. Above her, the air grew noticeably lighter. The dormant canopy of the orbital way station interface parted just enough to let true sunlight filter through the cleared atmospheric strata. Below in the adjacent cultural plaza, the gathering shifted naturally into a sequence of traditional resonance tones. Bronze chimes answered the purifier's sustained pitch, while ceremonial drums pulsed in time with the stabilized intake valves. The sound rolled across the stone terraces, weaving mechanical harmony with human tradition. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the layered acoustics wash over her. This was not merely a machine restoration. It was a reciprocal exchange between engineered systems and cultivated landscapes, a living proof that cooperative calibration could bridge millennia of quiet abandonment. She returned her attention to the archive drive as the archival signal stabilized further, shedding its broad frequency noise into a tight, coherent cluster of navigational parameters. The coordinates locked onto known stellar cartography with clinical precision, but Mara recognized immediately that they pointed beyond standard transit routes. The data outlined a precise sequence of gravitational lenses and atmospheric entry vectors. It was a clear pathway to the next coordinated restoration waypoint, mapped entirely by the purifier's harmonic response to the plaza's acoustic environment. She verified the trajectory against her ship's auxiliary nav computer, confirming the alignment without hesitation. Pulling up the full coordinate cluster on her display, Mara traced the convergence points across multiple dormant way stations and orbital interfaces. The pattern emerged slowly, revealing itself not as a scattered series of isolated maintenance nodes, but as a deliberately seeded network. Each waypoint shared synchronized ecological markers, calibrated to mature in tandem across light years. The builders had intentionally cultivated these locations as synchronized nurseries, planting the foundational infrastructure for planetary recovery long before any single civilization arrived to claim them. What she had approached as a series of independent repairs was, in truth, a unified restoration project spanning star systems, waiting patiently for cooperative hands to complete its cycle. Mara saved the final archive packet, sealed the drive's casing, and routed the remaining auxiliary power back into the way station's dormant grid. She packed her phase sensors and acoustic calibrators into their reinforced cases, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone whose work had shifted from discovery to execution. The atmospheric balance was secured, the archival data confirmed, and the next coordinate cluster mapped in precise detail. She adjusted her transit harness, initialized the departure sequence on her datapad, and watched the stabilized harmonic hum guide her toward the airlock. There was no need for force anymore, only alignment and the long path ahead.